All right, good afternoon. Uh, this is the Distinguished Kent Lecture, and definitely I would like to say a few words about Mr. Kent. So, Paul Fraser Kent Distinguished Lecture was initiated in 2007, and it is honoring outstanding leadership in the field of transportation engineering. Paul Kent was a 1920 graduate of the University of Illinois in civil engineering. As a highway contractor and material suppliers, he owned and operated two Champaign-based companies, the General Paving and the Builder Supply. Throughout his professional career, he expressed the highest regard and great esteem for the education in civil engineering. He received his first degree from the University of Illinois, and he dedicated himself to civic service in Illinois and surrounding states. He was the founder and president of the University of Illinois Civil Engineering Alumni Association, which has one of the largest, if it's not, of course, the largest in the country, and was the recipient of the University of Illinois Loyalty Award and the Civil Engineering Distinguished Alumnus Award. Mr. Kent has made a very generous gift to the University of Illinois in 1977, and it's sponsoring the Kent Lecture and especially the Distinguished Lecture. Today we are very honored and we are very, very pleased to have a very truly distinguished speaker with us here, Professor Chandra Bhat, and I did ask Yamfing if he can properly introduce our speaker. Yamfing?
Okay. Thank you. It's my great pleasure and honor to introduce our distinguished speaker, Professor Chandra Bhat from UT Austin. He is the director of the Data Supported Transportation Operations and Planning Center, which is a Tier 1 US DOT University Transportation Center. And he is also the Joe King Chair of Engineering at UT Austin. He previously served as the Associate Chairman of the Department of Civil Architecture and Environmental Engineering and Director of the Austin Center for Transportation Research. Dr. Bhat is widely recognized as a leading expert and a pioneer in developing econometric and mathematical models to analyze travel demand and travel behavior. His work has far-reaching impacts for public health, energy dependence, greenhouse gas emissions, and societal quality of life. Many of his works have been cited highly and also regarded as highly influential in the field. He also received numerous awards, including the prestigious ASCE Hoover Award, Laureate Award, Masters Award, and the Lifetime Achievement in Transportation Research and Education Award from the Council of University Transportation Centers. Dr. Bhat also actively served as chair of many committees and sections at professional societies, such as those in ASCE and the TRB. He also served the community very actively via various editorial capacities, including the editor-in-chief of Transportation Research Part B, the flagship journal in the field of transportation systems. With this, I would invite you to join me in welcoming our speaker, Dr. Chandra Bhat.
Thank you. Marshall, I already feel old with all of that narration. But I want to start off by saying it's such a pleasure to be in Urbana-Champaign, and I certainly feel very privileged to be part of the Kent Distinguished Lecture, especially after hearing a little bit more about what Kent was able to achieve and contributed to this field. So what I want to talk about today is about autonomous vehicles and potential changes in our commute patterns. But before I do that, just as a prelude, I do want to emphasize some of the unintended consequences that might arise with autonomous vehicles. I think there's a lot of buzz, and appropriately so, about the landscape that we are going to be getting into, potentially substantial benefits. And one benefit that I can see is safety. I think at the end of the day, safety is going to be the clincher for automation and autonomous vehicles for a variety of reasons. Because of driver error, no drowsy, impaired, stressed or aggressive drivers. And there's a lot of talk about capacity enhancement. The whole idea that For those of you who have taken traffic engineering, we have the 2-second rule or the 2.5 or 3-second rule when you're traveling on highways. And the main reason for that, correct me if I'm wrong, Ray, is because of perception reaction time. It's about 2.5 seconds or so, generally speaking, when you're going at that speed, to be able to react to someone braking ahead of you. And if you have automation, then perhaps you don't even have that perception reaction time, and you can essentially think of a train of vehicles moving at 65, 70 miles per hour. So this is what we call platooning. And so there's been a lot of talk about capacity enhancement. I'll come back to this because I have some questions about this myself. And then, of course, a lot of possibilities of energy and environmental benefits. So coming back, so there's a lot of advancement in technology. Not that all the technological challenges have been addressed. There are still concerns in terms of connectivity, about hacking, about cyber attacks, all of those things. So there are still some issues to be addressed, but quite a bit of work in the area of technology. A good bit of work in infrastructure. But what I want to talk about is the third leg of the stool, of the transportation stool, which is traveler behavior. How might we respond to automation, autonomous vehicles, etc. And for this particular discussion, I'll use automation and autonomous kind of synonymously, though there might be some differences. Autonomous is when you totally are brains off when you're driving, essentially. But automation can be lower levels, but I'll try to use them a little bit synonymously in this particular presentation. But what I want to focus is on the traveler behavior aspects of things. So the first thing is there is this question, how long is it going to take for adoption, which I think is a very relevant question as we move forward. While the predictions are as diverse as a number of people in this room, the one thing we can do is come up with clear lower bounds. Okay? So if you look at, for example, in 2015, 90 million light passenger and commercial vehicles were produced in the world, and there are over 1.2 billion vehicles in use in the world today. So on the roughest possible level, if we could stop the production of traditional vehicles tomorrow and started on automation and full automation, it will still take about 13 years before all the existing vehicles on the road could be replaced. And this assuming that we will magically be able to throw away our current vehicles and afford new vehicles. So, you start getting lower bounds. The typical thought is that by about 2040 or so, maybe you can expect 20% of the vehicles on the roadway to be fully autonomous. But again, there are some issues and concerns with that. And there are concerns, and this were, by the way, this in 2015, I admit, by today's standards, it's already dated, but this was a survey conducted in the Seattle area. The notion being that people in Seattle would be very tech savvy. Okay, perhaps one of the first set of people who will adopt these new technologies. But what I want to show over here is that there's quite a bit of concern, or somewhat concerned, or very concerned on equipment and system safety, system and vehicle security, cyber security, capability to react to the environment, and this is from what can be viewed as a very tech savvy population. Okay, so you can expect that there's going to be some level of, if you will, adoption considerations that might be related to security and system safety operations. Now, we also have been doing some work on what might this do to our travel patterns. So this is something I'll come back to later on. This is going to be the focus of my presentation. So we asked a question to survey respondents, and this was, by the way, a more recent survey in 2017. The question was, if you had an autonomous vehicle that could take you from your home place to your workplace, and you did not have to drive, would you be willing to move farther away from your workplace? Okay. And if so, by how much? And so what you can see over here is that 30% said not a single minute more. I'm going to stay put. But 70% said, yeah, I might consider that. I might consider relocation because the disutility of travel now is reduced considerably. Okay, I can be doing all other things, so I don't mind some longer commutes. But what is also interesting is household vehicle ownership in an AV future. There's been a lot of talk about shared autonomous vehicles, meaning in the context of the Ubers and the Lyfts going into an automation landscape and providing all of us driverless cars to move from point A to point B. 75% said, you know what, I'm not going to change the number of vehicles. Even if they're autonomous vehicles, I'm going to buy them as private vehicles. Okay? This whole notion that I still want control, there's some kind of an affective emotion, if you will, of ownership, that pride, that still seems to be there, at least in Texas. Okay? I don't know about other places, but certainly in Texas. And so what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to come back. So I'll focus on mainly the 75%. So people who are who plan to own private autonomous vehicles. And in the context of that population, what we are focusing on is going to be, what's going to be the amount that people are willing to move away, and what implications might that have on our congestion patterns and our travel patterns. So more generally, the AV impacts, many of them could have positive value to society. You have mobility constrained groups having more mobility, more participation in out-of-home activities. There are some issues, it could generate more empty trips. So a vehicle that drops me off at work and goes back home, that return home is going to be an empty trip, no one around. So you could generate more. On the positive side, yes, we probably do not need to have these parking garages where we have our vehicles sitting for 8 hours because the vehicles drop you and get back. Okay, so you could potentially recover some of that land for green development, for other developments. So there are positives, but let's also, look at some other potential responses of humans. There is this buzz that once we get into this new landscape, at least in some quarters, the buzz is congestion will completely disappear. No problems. Capacity will go triple-fold. All congestion goes away. Okay? And this is where we start putting question marks. Okay? I am not convinced. I am not yet sure about that. This is not to be cynical. I think the landscape is going to happen. We are going to go autonomous. Safety is going to be the clincher. But as I'll end, my pitch will be that does not mean that all our usual ways of trying to alleviate congestion are going to go away. Travel demand management options, better land use planning, okay, all of those are still going to be there. In my mind, we are just going to get one more tool in our toolbox to alleviate traffic congestion. Safety, it's a different issue. That is where I think you're going to have the most impact. So one of the considerations and concerns is, what if we live and work farther away? And this is, again, because I can use travel time more productively, access more desirable and higher paying jobs. A personal anecdote here. I have been in UT Austin for 22 years. And for 20 years, I did the same thing. Went from home to my garage, got into my vehicle, opened up the garage door, drove all the way, parked on campus, did whatever I have to. Did that almost automatically. And then, about 3 years back, my daughter, who was studying in Boston, she came home for one summer. Okay? And she was going to spend her summer in Austin doing some work there. And she just took control of my car and said, "Dad, sorry, but for this summer, your car is mine." And I'm a sucker. Whatever my babies want, they get. Okay? So I told her, fine. Okay? But, of course there's a but. What am I going to do? Right? I mean, how am I going to go into campus? And she said, "Dad, there's something called public transportation." Okay? I will drive you every day from home to a park and ride, okay, kiss and ride, and I'll come in the afternoon when you're back, I'll come and pick you up. Okay, that was the arrangement. And I said, okay, certainly, let's give it a try. I mean, until then, didn't think about public transportation at all. And so, since then, even after she went back to school, I have been taking the bus. Okay, and not only that, my wife, after my second daughter left home, rather than move to downtown where I would have liked to be, which is the usual move of all these empty nesters back to the bustling, vibrant social life, she decided no, she was going to go farther away from UT Austin because she wanted a much more palatial place. Okay? And her reasoning, I'm not sure, but her reasoning was, you know what, when our two daughters, if they decide to have a family, if they decide to have kids, the way that they'll come and stay with us if they visit Austin is if we give them privacy. Okay, so that was her reasoning. So we have a pretty palatial home, except it takes me an hour and 45 minutes one way. Okay, and the reason I'm saying that is I still go by bus, and the one saving grace for me is I have to drive only 5 minutes. Okay, I drive 5 minutes from my home today to a park and ride, and then after that it's all bus. The reason I'm bringing all these things up is, why am I, other than, yes, I have to agree to whatever my wife wants, other than that, why am I so okay with this? Because I can use my time productively. Okay, I just get on the bus, my notebook flap is open, Wi-Fi and all, I'm all set. It's work time for me. Okay, so we might be able to use our times productively, but as we live and work farther away, not all of us might do what I'm doing. Okay, some of us might still continue driving. Okay, except they're not driving. It's in a driverless car, and they can do all kinds of things. The question is, will this happen? How much of this will happen? What will it do to the vehicle miles of travel? Okay. Might it lead to much more of horizontal growth of cities? Okay. And that's what we wanted to determine as part of this particular research. But there are other things. People could visit destinations farther away, and one of the things that I do want to say is about this capacity increases. Okay. There might be some capacity increases because of possibility of platooning. But also think about this. If I'm going to be spending a whole lot of time in my vehicle, why would I stick to the cocoon of the car that I have now, this small sedan? Okay. If I have the wherewithal, I'm going to go toward larger vehicles. I'm spending much more time. Have a sofa, have a living room entirely. Okay. And if many of us start doing this, and our survey indicates that most of us are still going to hold on to these vehicles. Okay. If many of us start doing this, the vehicles start getting bigger. And by the way, since 2012, the percentage of large vehicles has increased. Large vehicles meaning SUVs, crossovers, all those kinds, has increased from about 20% to about 48 to 50% today. Okay. So if we start going toward this, whatever happened to the platooning related capacity increase, at least that could be a huge offset, okay, of that capacity increase. So, again, the issue is there could be unintended consequences, and as we move into this landscape, it doesn't mean we just ditch all our civil engineering practices that we have had for years. Those are still going to be handy. It's just one additional tool that we have that we can leverage. So with that as a prelude, AVs will lead to increased passengerization, no questions about that. In fact, Volvo and many other car manufacturers are advertising driverless vehicles as new living areas, new alternatives to flights, because once you remove the steering wheel, you can get more room. And we talked about a decrease in travel time disutility, and AVs may also trigger an acceleration in suburbanization for the issues that we just discussed. So let's look at the Dallas-Fort Worth area where we undertook this survey, and the data formed a basis for our analysis. By the way, Dallas-Fort Worth is one of the fastest growing regions in the US, as is Austin, Texas, as is pretty much every major city in Texas. And much of the increase in Dallas is happening in the fringe areas, to the north and to the east. Okay? Suburbanization is happening at a rapid rate. And it's also seen in the commuting stats. The average one-way commute is 27 minutes. It's 2 minutes higher than the national average. And the super commutes of over 90 minutes rose. Okay, so you clearly see some suburbanization. So our issue was, what might happen to these cities as we move into this autonomous landscape? And what might happen to our devaluation, if you will, of travel time? Travel time is considered as a disutility in most of the models. Will that hold? How much of that will hold? We wanted to see that. So most past AV studies have been based on simulations using a priori assumptions of the VTTS, by the way, is the value of travel time savings. Very simply speaking, how much do we value our travel time or devalue our travel time? So there have been studies that assume that our valuation of travel time will decrease by 100%, okay? Or that capacity will increase by 2 or 3-fold. And these assumptions are fed into simulation models. Now, these simulation models are pretty okay. They are basically relevant for prediction into the future, but it's only as appropriate as the assumptions and inputs you build in. So these studies also completely ignore variations in the value of travel time, generally speaking, across a very heterogeneous population. Okay? And there's inadequate investigation of the effect of multitasking activities and work productivity. So we wanted to look at this whole issue of how inclined are people to use their travel time productively, and how much impact does that have on this valuation of travel time savings. So there are a whole lot of studies today in this area, most of them focusing on mode choice. What will people choose? Will they continue to travel by transit, other modes of transportation? But we are focused on the larger picture, which is the work and home location patterns. And there are 2 studies that have done some work in this area. The first one, however, once again assumes a certain percentage decrease in the valuation of travel time and churns through simulation methods. The second was done in Italy on a small sample of about 200 individuals, and it was more exploratory. And what we wanted to do is look at it from a much more rigorous, large sample disaggregate analysis perspective. So, bottom line, 2 questions. Are people willing to relocate home and work locations given more productive use of travel times if they have access to autonomous vehicles? And will people be willing to increase their commute times because of the reduced stress and ability to do other tasks? And if so, to what extent? Those were the 2 questions that formed the basis for this particular research. By the way, in the title slide, you would have seen 4 authors. The first 3 authors are, 2 of them are my current students, PhD students, and one of them is a former student who is now a faculty member in Australia. So this is a joint effort with my graduate students. So we conducted a survey in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and we were able to coordinate with an industry firm, Chandra. It's a construction firm, but they do a lot of toll lane management. And so through them, we were able to survey people, and Chandra gave credits. So the bottom line is, as they had an email listing of all the people who have used their toll roads in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And so if you responded to the survey, you would get, I think, something like 10 free rides on specific sections of toll roads in Dallas. So it was an incentive, and we got about 1,600 responses back, which is pretty good. We collected data on individual demographics, household demographics, commute travel characteristics, and as importantly, surveyed individuals' technology use, how tech savvy they were. We wanted to get a sense of that. And also, are they really interested in travel time productivity? Even if they're not driving, we wanted to get a sense of that too. For some of you who might not be aware, we have to use stated choice questions. Stated choice is, unlike revealed choice, where revealed choice is what I see you do today. But in the context of automation and autonomous vehicles don't exist today. So we put them in a hypothetical situation, and what we did was we showed them a video of what AVs might look like, autonomous vehicles might look like. It's just a 90-second video, and after looking at that, they might get a sense of what we are talking about, and then they had to respond to some of the questions that we asked them. So, in terms of a model framework, I will try not to go into too much of the rigors of the modeling framework. I'm happy to talk about this later on with any of you who might be interested. But basically, we had individual demographics and household composition. We had commute and other characteristics as they exist today. And the idea was we also collected some indicators of technology savviness. I'll talk about this. And also some indicators that might provide us some sense of the interest in productive use of time. And through that, we were able to construct two latent valuations, if you will, of tech savviness and interest in productive use of time, which then fed into the real outcomes of interest. Would you be willing to move home? Would you be willing to move work? And what's the commute time increase that you will tolerate or you might be willing to tolerate? So those were the main questions. So these were the indicators we used to construct our latent measures of tech savviness and interest in productive use of travel time. Are you able to see through me? Cool. Thank you. I knew I was transparent. I frequently use online banking. So we asked the series of questions, and using confirmatory factor analysis, we were able to boil all of these indicators down to some measure of tech savviness among individuals that varied across individuals. And what you will notice is that most of these people are very tech savvy. Okay? They load on describes me extremely well. So I frequently use online banking. You have upwards of 50% who say that describes me very well or describes me extremely well. So I frequently purchase products online. Again, you have that. Spend at least some time on online social media. Wow, that is huge. Okay, people spend a whole lot of time on social media. And by the way, I'm totally not there. I'm not that. Okay, I don't belong there because I refuse to go into social media. I don't do Facebook. I don't do whatever you can call it. My wife, on the other hand, is completely into it. Okay, so and she is the tech savvy person in our household. I just do what I like to do in terms of work and research. That's it. But anyway, these are very tech savvy people. And interestingly, self-driving vehicles are appealing because they'll allow me to use my travel time more efficiently. Again, quite a few people say, yeah, that describes me very well or extremely well. And I would not mind having a longer commute if I could use my commute time productively. Quite a bit of people who say, yeah, I would agree with that. Okay, so based on these indicators, we were able to come up with measures of tech savviness and productive use of travel time, and then we used those measures along with our three main outcomes of interest in a simultaneous framework, where we essentially associated these 5 outcomes with demographic variables and current commute patterns. So the sample population, we have men comprised 58.4%. The DFW census says 54%. And by the way, these are only commuters. Okay, so these are only commuters because much of the survey responses were obtained from folks who use the toll road. Okay, and mainly in the morning peak. So commuters, age group 45 to 64, clearly much higher representation than in the census, clearly much more educated, much higher income, and commute time average was a little more than the norm. So the bottom line is, we will be the first to admit that our sample is not representative of the Dallas-Fort Worth commuting population. Okay? But the relationships that we develop between our outcomes of interest and demographic variables, we don't see any reason that those relationships themselves should be substantially affected by having a sample that is not representative on the exogenous variables. So let's look at the residential and work relocation outcomes. These are the main outcomes of interest. Again, about 30% said, "No, I'm not interested, not a single minute more." Up to 10 minutes, you had a good band of 30% who said, "Yeah, if it's up to 10 minutes, I'll be willing to tolerate that increase in commute time." 23% 10 minutes, 10 to 20, and you had quite a few people. 20 to 30 is this band, and greater than 30, which is not there in the legend, that is 6.8%. So you had quite a few people who said, "Yeah, I would be willing to tolerate and increase commute time." Now we also looked at a relocation combination, so the yes or no for move. So about 55% said, "I'm not going to move my work or move my home because of autonomous vehicles." And then you'll see the yes was about 22%, okay, and the remaining formed here. So we had quite a few observations in all of the 4 categories of interest to us, and also we also had this information about the willingness to tolerate an increase in commute time. So again, the modeling framework, I won't go over it in too much detail, but we have already discussed a little bit of that. So let me go to the results, and I'm going to just give a sprinkling of the results because I want to spend more time on the implications than going through the results per se. The results show, not surprisingly, that, and correctly so, these indicators are appropriate for tech savviness. The green means as people said they were extremely interested, or this characterizes me very well, it means that the tech savviness latent construct increased. So these are all in the appropriate directions, no surprises there. This is interesting. Women, they indicated that, relative to men, they are not that interested in productive use of travel time. Okay. This was interesting for us, and so why might this be? We went to some behavioral psychology literature, and there are 2 possible reasons for this. One is, as egalitarian as our societies are moving toward, the woman still continues to shoulder the burden or the pleasure, whichever way you want to have it, of child rearing and household responsibilities. Okay? And some of these things, you cannot do, or you cannot help do all of these things in your vehicle. Okay? You have to be at home, or you have to be at some other place. So the kinds of responsibilities of women might be such that even in this society, they are not able to pursue them productively within a vehicle. Okay, that might be one. And the second one is that there is some literature that indicates the concept of productiveness differs among males and females. Okay, generally speaking, males, they consider work to be productive. While women, in terms of productivity, how we define productivity was left to the respondent, but their notion is much more of, not necessarily work, but other kinds of things, socializing, just chatting with others, looking up some things on their iPhones, etc. So, it's the type of activities that women generically do, and the type of activities that can be pursued within a vehicle. That might explain some of that. Now, this is no surprise to any of us. The younger folks are much more tech savvy than the older ones, and much more interested in the productive use of travel time. Much more of, obviously being savvy with smartphones and doing all kinds of things. It was interesting How many of you have heard, I'm sure it's some of us who don't quite grasp the meaning. So as I was coming here to UIUC, my daughter from Penn State, she texted to the group meaning the family, which comprises me, my wife, and her older sister, something about Taco Bell and someone praying near Taco Bell. And I didn't get it. I didn't get it, what she was trying to convey. And then my younger daughter writes to my older daughter, just tell dad what a meme is. Okay? M-E-M-E, is it pronounced? I don't even know how to pronounce it. It's a meme. Okay, I've been wanting to Google search this meme stuff. I don't even know what a meme is. Okay, so that's the level of tech savviness that I have, right? I understand it's something about mimicking something else that is supposed to engender some humor. I don't get it. Okay, I think you know what it is, Hadi. So just tell me after the presentation. Okay, enlighten me. So anyway, not so, and this was interesting. Non-Hispanic whites self-reported. Remember this self-reporting through the indicators that they were less tech savvy than other races. Okay, and we were not quite sure what was going on. But the one thing we did notice is that this tech savviness also included something about online banking. And in some other studies, we have noticed that non-Hispanic whites are much more sensitive and concerned about security issues and privacy issues than are other races. And I don't know if that somehow got mixed into this tech savviness, because we used, whether you do online banking, all of these kinds of things as indicators, and that might have somehow permeated into that result that we got. Anyway, let me not go through too much of the results, but more tech savvy, you're more likely to move home. More interest in productive use of travel time, more likely to move home. These are all what you would expect. So no surprises in any of these things. So let me see. And of course, we wanted to show how good our model is doing relative to simpler models. So we compared our model with some simpler models, and the bottom line is, yes, we can show that from a data fit perspective, our model, which is what we call a joint model of jointly modeling all of the outcomes together, clearly outperforms a model that completely ignores correlations or unobserved factor correlations across our outcomes. So I want to spend more time on the implications of all of these things. Our model can be developed can be incorporated within land use and travel evolution models, simply because we are able to determine the movement, predict rather, the work relocation and home relocations of individuals. So this can be fed right away. And the way to do it would be every individual in a synthetic population is taken through our model in an agent-based microsimulation. Okay? That can be done quite easily. But what was more important for us is we looked at the move, home, move, work. So these are the four categories. Whether you would consider moving home, whether you would consider moving work. So that's the SS, S-no, etc., etc. And the result for all the combinations, we are able to come up with what's the expected value of commute time increase. So people indicated that I would be willing to tolerate so much more of commute time. So I can predict, because I have the model, in this group, conditional on individuals choosing the yes, yes category, how much of commute time increase are they willing to tolerate? I'm able to compute that from my model. And from that, I can turn it on its head. Okay? The idea being that, the assumption being, but also the idea being, that if Imad is willing to tolerate an 80% increase in commute time, it means that he is willing to devalue, or he devalues his travel time by that same amount. Okay? It's just turning it on its head, right? So basically, if I'm willing to tolerate more of a commute time, it means that my valuation of travel time, okay, that decreases by the same equivalent amount. Okay. So I'm able to turn it on its head, and what I'm able to get is the expected value of the decrease in the valuation of travel time. And not surprisingly, the people who say yes and yes to moving work and moving home are the most willing to tolerate longer commutes, and which effectively means that their valuation of travel time drops quite a bit in the context of autonomous vehicles to about 83.8%. And as you go down, that decreases. Obviously, people who do not want to, who do not believe that they will tolerate much of a commute time, they are going to be in a no-no category to begin with. Okay, they are going to say, no, I'm not going to move home, I'm not going to move work. And by the way, the way we phrased this, it was not moving home closer to work. It was how farther away are you willing to move? Okay, that's the way we phrased the question. Now, what that says is, I can then group all of these three subgroups, which indicate some willingness to relocate, either the home or the work location, and I can group them to get what's the expected value of the valuation of travel time savings decrease. So in this group of those who are willing to relocate, that value came out to be about 68%. This value came out to be about 30%. Okay. What's this telling us? First, when people in our micro simulation models, when they consider home and work locations fixed, and they want to see how activity travel patterns will change in the context of autonomous vehicles, they use decreases of the valuation of travel time of the order of 80%, 100%. Okay. Our model says, I don't think so. It's going to be much lesser. Okay. People are not going to be, given they're not changing locations, they're not going to be willing to, so easily disregard the burden of long commute travel times. That's what our results are saying. Okay. 30% relative to 70 and 80 and 100% used in simulation studies. My point is, my worry has always been that in this buzz of trying to come up with results on autonomous vehicles, people are just plucking things from the air, going through simulation models and saying this is what's going to happen. Okay. And for some of you who already know or might not know, I'm very deeply involved in a particular journal in transportation. And even when I get submissions to this journal, I find some of this happening and without much caveats at all. Okay, without much caveats. So this is what's going to happen. Congestion is going to fly away. This capacity is going to increase by so much. Okay? Of course, that's what your models are going to say if you come up with certain inputs. But are those inputs appropriate? Right? So my worry has been that we are diving so quickly into our agent-based microsimulation models without focusing enough energy and effort on how will humans respond? Will they behave in specific ways? Okay. My punchline on this, and I have mentioned this many times, is as scholars, we all like to publish papers. Okay? I mean, it's part and parcel of what we do. We enjoy that, right? And timeliness does matter, right? As I like to tell my graduate students, you have to show that you're doing work, you're doing good work, you're publishing papers. So timeliness does matter, and you cannot take 6 years and ask for a PhD just because I worked there for 6 years. There has to be some production. Okay? So yes, timeliness does matter, but the point is also that I feel in the large scheme of things, we all want to get there as quickly as we can. But I think there's so much of a rush to get there first rather than get there right. Okay? And that's where I'm getting more and more concerned about the field. And I would like us to reflect a little bit more. Are we making the right assumptions? Can we focus a little bit more on behavior first before running off into these mechanical simulations? Okay. So that's one thing, and this is clearly an indication that maybe, and I'm going to come up with a whole slew of limitations of our study. I'm not saying that this is confirmatory in any way, but what I'm saying is it starts giving some sense and insights, and I'd like to see more and more studies on the behavioral side rather than the simulation side. And this number, just keep this in mind, I'll come back to this. This got substantial significance. What this is saying is if people are willing to relocate, then they are willing to tolerate quite long commute times, and their valuation of travel time decreases substantially by about 67%. Now, these are times, but if you assume that there is a one-to-one correspondence between commute times and commute distances, then what this is saying is that cities could spread horizontally by up to 67%. Okay, this urban sprawl. And in cities like Dallas, that can be a huge issue. It's already suburbanizing, there's already a lot of urban sprawl, and if cities start expanding at this huge a rate, vehicle miles of travel will increase. Okay. So, some policy recommendations. Let's not stop smart land use policies and proactive planning policies. That has to continue. Okay. I don't think that driverless vehicles is going to be a panacea for congestion-related issues, reliability-related issues. So it's once again another tool in our toolbox. I would like us to capture in our surveys more of commuters' multitasking activities and the behaviors that they might undertake within an AV. We started doing this, but there could be much more of work in this area. And again, I won't belabor this point, but you all know what I'm talking about here. User behavior considerations are critical in agent-based and other simulation-based models. So yes, I can go down this list of limitations. Okay. Its survey is not representative of the DFW metro complex and excludes non-commuters completely. Okay. The whole issue of stated preference questions, is that valid? Can people, state things that they'll follow through with, or would that be some kind of discord between what they state and what they actually do? Very valid. That's a problem with all stated preference exercises, but hey, autonomous vehicles don't exist today. What can you do? You have to go to stated responses. More questions about multitasking would be good. Costs of owning, maintaining, and operating AVs are not clearly incorporated. Certainly, these are all important limitations. But at the end of the day, again, time and how we spend our time becomes the key. Okay, because in autonomous vehicles, you have the ability to spend time differently. So I think that is something we have to continue to study. I like to say this, time is kind of a background canvas. It's a tapestry. Okay, it's like this. It's, time is not two-dimensional, but think of this. This is your 24-hour time space. Okay, you can do whatever you want in terms of draping and weaving your activity patterns here. And autonomous vehicles might provide you more efficient tools to weave and drape your activity patterns. But this 24 hours, that's fixed. Okay, so it's all about trade-offs of time, okay, between being productive, not productive, multitasking, not multitasking, etc. And technologies enhance our toolbox to paint, weave, and drape, but the background time canvas is a fixity. Okay? And I think so time and how we spend our time becomes the key. So in terms of the bottom line, I think there's a lot of uncertainty, right? We are all trying to focus on different slices of this mega piece. I was talking with Jeff, if Jeff is here, earlier today. about considerations on the infrastructure and payment side. So many unknowns, so many things that we are, and we acknowledge that. But more uncertainty implies more need for planning. So that's where I like to say, as researchers, we love uncertainty. Okay, practitioners do not like uncertainty much. They want, give me, if I do this, what will happen? Just tell me. Okay, and you'll find sometimes many reporters, that's happened to me, who get a little annoyed. Okay, because I'm not giving them a straight answer. Right? What will happen? This is what I think will happen if, come on, stop your ifs. Right? So, but that's what we are scientists. Right? So, more uncertainty implies more need for planning. But planning, this is where I think there needs to be a change in, from a practitioner standpoint, I think they need to start recognizing some level of uncertainty. Okay. How do we articulate that uncertainty to them? That's something that we have to do better. I would say we need to conduct studies to understand possible behavioral responses. Regulation is lagging behind. That is a huge issue. So, this is hypothetical to you all, right? Our study suggests that people might start living very far away from their workplace. Sprawl might happen at a huge, rapid rate. So, the question then becomes, can we have a proactive policy? And as dramatic and drastic as this might seem, the question I have is, might we have a regulation, a policy that says that Yanfeng shall not live more than 15 miles from his workplace? Okay. As a way to control this urban sprawl that might otherwise happen because of how humans respond. Now, that is an interesting question. We are a democracy, right? Where does the balance lie between regulation and democracy? In the same way, we talk about safety. Now, I'm convinced about this, that from a safety standpoint, automation will help. Okay. But can I tell Marshall at some point in the future, you shall not drive, Marshall? And I'm just picking on Marshall, but Marshall is this avid driver. He loves to drive. Okay. He watches James Bond movies not to see the fancy cars, but to see how James Bond operates those cars. Okay. So he's this avid driver. He thinks that man controls machine. What are you talking about? Okay. But can I come up with a regulation? It seems dramatic, that says, no, you cannot drive, even if you want to. Okay. In a democracy. And I don't know what your response would be, but I have thought about this now. I never get calls, I don't know, it should be my daughter, telling me, what is a meme, Dad? I'll tell you. But in a democracy, can we have these kinds of regulations? I've thought about this and I think, yeah, it's possible. It is possible. Today, we do not allow some people to drive for various reasons, right? And the analogy I give is, by the way, if you didn't know, I'm an immigrant. I came to this country about 35 years back. Okay. And I was always a left-leaning social liberal. Okay. 35 years back, when I first came to this country, or even if I were in the country I was born in, if someone came and told me, I shall not be allowed to smoke in public places, I would have figuratively gone up in arms. How dare you? How dare you? You're infringing on my civil liberties. Today, I don't mean to offend anyone. Even in France, you cannot smoke in public places. How did that happen? Much more realization of the ills of secondhand smoke. And as I have told my daughters so many times, and they'll roll their eyes when I say it, You have full freedom, my ladies, but don't forget that with freedom comes responsibility. They'll roll their eyes. Okay? So that's what happened with the smoking issue. Right? It's a democracy, but that doesn't mean each one of us can do willy-nilly. Right? So if we are able to show that safety actually will be substantially improved, which I believe we'll be able to show, yes, there might be a time when I can say, Marshall, you shall not drive, even if you want to drive. Okay? So these are interesting things, but I think we as researchers should start talking much more about some of the behavioral issues that can then inform regulation, different kinds. Imad has indicated I have to cut it, so I'm going to cut it right now. Thank you.
There's two reasons. You have to catch a flight and they will kick us out of the room. I guess we have maybe 3-4 minutes for questions.
I have a question. You heavily emphasizes on the traveling time. You think it's crucial for this in the AV future. Is that your assumption, or do you have evidence to support?
I think at the end of the day, there is a lot of literature that suggests that we do not travel for the sake of traveling. We travel for the sake of participating in activities. So it is more the issue of how we pursue our activities and where we pursue our activities. And I think it's more than an assumption. It is a fact that if we are able to use our times, travel times, doing nothing other than driving, but doing something more productive in terms of activities we would otherwise have pursued, there can be substantial benefits. Yeah.
An analogy occurred to me while you were speaking, that we have many of the benefits of autonomous transportation. If I were chauffeur-driven, I could work. Did you look at, or have there been studies of people who take a limousine or other transportation where they can sit in the back and make phone calls, work on their computers?
Yes, yes, we have published a few papers, and I think you're absolutely right. If we can examine today's, for example, ride hailing, what do people do in ride hailing? That might give us an indication of what they might do in the context of autonomous vehicles. Though, even there we found some differences. We are able to observe what they do in ride hailing today, and we asked them, what would you do in an autonomous vehicle future? One difference, for example, was that women are much more willing to share rides with strangers today in a ride-hailing environment, in the Uber, Lyft, etc. But in an autonomous vehicle future, they are less willing to be willing to share rides with strangers. And we are puzzled with some of these results, but one thing that occurred to us is that perhaps women today, when they are in a ride-hailing mode, they see the driver as their protectorate. If the stranger does anything, the driver is there to protect kind of me. While in an autonomous vehicle future, when you don't have a driver, they are much more concerned about security. So yes, but you're right. We can make out get some insights from today's ride hailing. We have looked at that.
So I have a quick question. In the state of Illinois recently, they have been considering as a legislation to put taxes on the miles driven, although this was not successful. But the question, will that limit what you were talking about? Will that address it?
I think this is the point.
That's it.
That is the point. And we believe there will not be any other vehicle tool to be able to control human responses other than cost.
Yep. Thank you so much. On behalf of Kent Lecture, I would like to present you with the distinguished speaker for Kent Seminar.
Thank you. Thank you, Imad. Such a pleasure. Such a pleasure. I cherish this. Thank you all.
everyone.
Have fun. Thank you.